Hello everyone, welcome back. So in this session, we are going to look at some product related decisions. Specifically, we'll focus on decisions that become key once the product has been developed and is ready to be taken to the market. This is not to say that these decisions are only important for products that already exist in the market. So it's the branding, positioning, and packaging decisions have already been made for existing products. So what we are saying here is that these decisions are more critical for a new offering. So the main product-related decisions that we're going to look at are branding, positioning, and packaging. So branding, positioning, and packaging, so we'll see very shortly how important these decisions become and how they impact our pricing decisions, how they impact our distribution decisions, and so on. So as far as branding is concerned, there are three key elements that become really important. So to understand this, let us first look at how branding affects the value and or the perceptions of the product and how that in turn affects our marketing mix decisions like pricing, distribution, etc. So the brand often helps us communicate the hidden benefits of a product, like the quality of the product or benefits or attributes of the product that are intrinsically hard to communicate. So for example, if you think of a perfume, it'll be very hard to articulate how the perfume smells. But if the consumer has had an experience with a certain brand of perfume, then simply stating the brand is sufficient to communicate the fragrance of the perfume. Now, in other cases, we may be able to communicate the quality of the product with the brand. So, for example, in the automobile market, consumers, through their own personal experience or through word of mouth, may know how good an Acura is, how reliable these cars are, how fuel efficient and how safe these cars are. So, if Acura introduces a new car, it'll communicate these hidden benefits to the new product with its brand. Okay, so in markets where products have some hidden attributes like quality, which are intrinsically hard to verify at the time of purchase, but do affect the consumption value, the use of the brand allows the firm to communicate these hidden benefits. Now, brands also have an economic value, and this becomes obvious. For instance, if you look at the pharmaceutical market, the branded drugs often command a significant price premium over the generic drug. Now, in this instance, because both the generic and the branded drug have to get the approval of FDA, which is the Federal Drug Administration, so both the generics and the branded products have cleared the FDA's bar, right, for the use by consumers. Hence, the quality of generics cannot be as bad, right? If it's FDA approved, that means the quality of a particular product like this cannot be bad. Now, if the quality differential cannot justify the price difference, what really can? It's actually the brand and the equity that the brand builds. So the brand may stand for functional benefits, such as reliability, performance, and economical like Maytag, Bose, and Honda respectively. So you can actually map it. So Maytag is known for reliability, Bose is known for performance, and Honda is an economic car. Okay, so there is some benefit that we're getting. Every brand has its own functional benefit. Now, in other cases, brand may also offer psychological values such as prestige, safety, wholesomeness, and as with Tiffany's, Volvo, and the Disney brands, respectively, for instance, Volvo is perceived to make safe cars. Whether or not this is objectively true, but consumers certainly perceive Volvo to make safe cars. Now, because of the functional and or the psychological benefits associated with brands, consumers are willing to pay a premium for these brands. Okay, so think about it. So brand essentially is the additional value. So brand adds in some additional value on top of the functional benefits of a product to the consumers, which is what really differentiates them from the no name products that may be functionally very similar. So it's the additional value that the brand sort of adds on top of the functional benefits of a product. Okay, so because of the functional and or psychological benefits associated with brands, consumers are willing to pay a premium for these brands. So the other things that the brands offer is an implicit contract to the consumers. Now, what I mean by that is once you brand your product, you're basically putting your name on it, which allows the consumers to identify the product with a specific brand or a company. Now, if the product performs poorly or does not deliver on the value that was initially promised or claimed, then the consumers can, quote, punish these products by simply refusing to purchase it in the future. Now, this is a potent threat that brands face because a lot goes into building a brand and maintaining its reputation, and make false claims for short-term benefits will eventually ruin the long-term or the long-run reputation of a company, which is certainly not cost-effective. So therefore, it makes economic sense for the brand to deliver on its promise so that they can avoid the wrath of the consumer. Now, there have been some instances where some brands experienced a backlash from the consumers which were not handled properly by the company. Now, a well-known example is one of Audi, which was a very popular brand in the early 80s. Now, at that time, some of their models would accelerate suddenly, which resulted in some fatal accidents. And Audi did not acknowledge it. They didn't manage this crisis very effectively. Rather than recalling the specific models, they turned around and blamed the drivers for not knowing how to drive the car and that there was nothing wrong with the car. Now, because of how they managed the crisis and the lack of sensitivity on part of the firm, the brand certainly lost face in the eyes of the consumers. Now, more recently, Volkswagen, with its emissions crisis, is also experiencing a very similar problem and has lost a lot of brand equity. So clearly, building and maintaining a brand name is costly, and because of that, there is an incentive and hence the implicit contract for the brand to deliver on its promises. Now, because of the brand's ability to communicate hidden benefits and the economic value and the kind of money back guarantee that it offers, which is to say that if we don't deliver, you don't buy from us in future, how you go about branding your product becomes important. Now, there are several approaches to branding. So there is what are called corporate brands, essentially, where all brands manufactured by a company are solid under the same brand name. Now, examples of the companies that adopt this approach are Colgate, GE, Clorox, Maytag, etc. In contrast, companies like Procter & Gamble have very product-specific brand names. So unless we look carefully at the packaging, some of us may not even know that Tide, Maxwell House, Kleenex, they're actually all P&G products. So one of the interesting questions we could ask here is, why would you adopt a corporate branding strategy versus a product-specific branding strategy? So with corporate branding, because there is a single brand name across multiple product categories, the company can leverage its brand name in a new category. So this is more efficient because the brand name is already built and the cost of developing the brand name in the new category would be minimal. Now, in contrast, with product-specific brand names, the company cannot leverage its brand name in one category to introduce the product in a new category. So brand development costs are certainly higher with product-specific brands. So P&G, for instance, will have to commit resources to building Tide in the detergent category, Maxwell House in the coffee category, whereas Colgate simply has to commit resources to essentially build the Colgate brand. Now, the upside of course, with product-specific brands is that brands are insulated. That is, if Tide does not perform well, or there is some negative press about Tide that does not have a negative spillover on Maxwell House or other P&G brands, which is actually one of the downsides of doing corporate strategy. So if you're choosing a corporate strategy, what are we doing here? We want one brand name and we want to brand all our products under one brand name. So this negative spillover effect can actually be very bad. So if, let's say, one of the Colgate products does not do well, consumers may have a tendency to infer most of the products that are carried by that brand, they may be bad. So there's another concept called brand dilution, which I'll get into a minute. But the positive spillover is what you can leverage if you use a corporate brand because of stimulus generalization. So if a consumer is happy with one particular product that belongs to one brand, we have a tendency to make positive inferences about all the other product lines that that brand may carry. Positive spillovers, it's actually a good thing to have corporate brand, but quite the opposite. If one particular product does poorly, then consumers may infer that, the rest of the products that are carried by the brand, which is the corporate brand, may not be as good. Okay, so that's really the challenge with the corporate strategy. Okay, so now related to corporate brands is umbrella brands, where the corporate brand is used with different extensions in different categories. So an example is Lipton. So Lipton tea and Lipton soup. We also have the idea of sub-brands. The department stores. Sears has sub-brands. Kenmore for its appliances and Craftsman for tools. So yet another branding strategy or technique is co-branding, where companies operating in different or related markets form an alliance to co-brand their products. So Citibank has co-branded with both Visa and MasterCard. Exxon and Mobil, well, many computer manufacturers have co-branded with Intel with the Intel Inside logo on their computers. Okay, so there are different approaches to branding. Okay, so now related to benefits that a brand offers in the notion of brand equity, one view of brand equity is that it is the price premium that a brand can command over a functionally similar product. Okay, so that's exactly what I was trying to say a few slides back. So brand equity is the additional value for which a consumer is willing to pay a price premium on top of the functional benefits. So with the previous example of the pharmaceutical product or pharmaceutical market, the premium that Bayer aspirin is able to command over the generic aspirin is due to its brand equity. So now brand equity endows the company with a resource, with an asset which can manifest in many ways. Price premium over a functionally similar product is one manifestation of brand equity, simply put. So if Coke were to introduce a diet cola, without using the Coke brand, it would be significantly more expensive. So the cost of introduction can be lowered by using the Coke name because it's a familiar name. So the Coke drink cola would also command a price premium relative to the diet cola if it did not have the Coke brand name. So these kind of economic benefits that a brand name has constitute its brand equity. So how can we build brand equity? Now it can be done by advertising to build up awareness, by offering quality products consistently, and building a reputation of delivering on that promise over a prolonged period of time, which in turn ensures that consumers are satisfied and keep coming back to you. So brand loyalty is also another manifestation of brand equity. Now, co-branding and similar associations are also other mechanisms to acquire and build brand equity. So now once you have equity, you can enter new markets or new product categories to get the most bang for your brand equity. And so it's important to evaluate, but in order for us to do that, for us to leverage the brand equity, it's actually very, very important for us to evaluate the fit of the new product category with the brand name. So this is where I'll talk about brand dilution, okay? So for instance, if you are Arm & Hammer and you have bathroom cleaning products, and if you are trying to enter the oral cleaning products, you have to worry about how the existing brand equity would be perceived to be a good fit by the consumers. So if the product, so let's say if you want to have more extensions in other categories, and if it's not belonging to the same product class, oftentimes the marketeers will run into the problem of diluting their brand. So that's brand dilution. So the new products that you introduce under a same brand name, because of the equity that you've built, sometimes it can hurt your brand as well, because consumers get confused about the image that you've created in their minds. So if it is a good fit, then certainly you can leverage your brand equity to reduce the cost of introduction, as we said earlier, with the Coke example. And you can also get actually rapid trial and adoption. So you also do not have to spend too much time on positioning your product, because the existing brand name and equity will be sufficient to communicate your new product's positioning. Now, in extending your brand name into a new category, one has to also evaluate the potential negative effects of using your brand name in a new product category. So that's what I was talking about. So if the product categories are not too closely related, then consumers might be confused, like I said, about what your brand really stands for. And again, I'm repeating this concept because it's kind of important, because that would result in brand illusion, or brand illusion can occur if your product performs poorly also. So this is actually a challenge for the marketeers. If you're doing corporate branding, and even if your product is in the right class of products that you introduce, but let's say if this new product performs poorly, even if it belongs to the similar product class of the current portfolio that you have, then also that can lead to a brand illusion, the concept of brand illusion, because if that product performs poorly, it may have a negative effect on the current portfolio of products that you may have had in the past that may be doing exceedingly well. Okay, so now let's turn to positioning, which is about communicating how you would like the consumers to perceive your brand relative to other brand offerings in the marketplace. So positioning essentially is what is the unique place that your product occupies in the minds of the consumers relative to the competing products on some dimensions. Okay, so it's important because this is very important, because that forms the basis of your selling proposition, which is why should consumers buy your product and not competitors' product. So that's the positioning. It's positioning that's actually going to differentiate you from your competitors, because how you're perceived by your consumers, it's extremely important for marketers to understand, because all the communication that you want to have with your consumers should be designed keeping your positioning strategy in mind, how you want to be perceived relative to competition. So it's because your brand has some characteristics that are objectively different or subjectively different, and how these differences translate into benefits that your brand offers, which are superior to those offered by the competing products. So now in positioning your product, you also want to be cognizant of what the consumer's ideal preferences or ideal points are, and of the holes in the market, which is essentially the absence of a suitable offering that caters to the needs of a sufficiently large set of consumers. So if you're able to take an offering and position it as an alternative that best satisfies the needs of this set of consumers, then then that becomes your unique selling proposition or USP. So a key aspect of positioning, therefore, is how you differentiate your product from other alternatives that are available to the consumer. So a lot of times firms will simply use their brands to differentiate. For example, a rose is not a rose unless you purchase from a specific store, or a banana is not a banana unless it's a Dole brand. Okay, so chicken is not chicken unless it's Purdue chicken. That's how they want to be perceived. So as we said before, each brand must have its own unique selling proposition, which is in the above examples is it's simply the brand itself. So as discussing earlier, through investments in branding activities, brands do develop a persona. They can actually develop a persona. So in other instances, the differentiating features are more objective. Like large screen TV differentiation here is based on screen size. Supermarkets are differentiated on quality or pricing policy, everyday low pricing versus high-low pricing, and then ketchup differentiated on how runny or thick it is, etc. Now, to really see how differentiated the products are is to ask consumers how they actually perceive them. Okay, and this is really important, and it's actually called a perceptual map. Okay, so this is what a perceptual map is all about. So what is in a perceptual map? A perceptual map essentially gives us the position of the different brands in a two-dimensional plot where the axes are the benefit dimensions. So a view of the plot gives the positions of the different brands relative to the other alternatives in the market. And we will see an example of a perceptual map on the next slide. But before I do that, I just want to say that if there are multiple consumer segments in the market, then that's how they perceive the brands relative to one another, and hence the perceptual map may not be the same across different consumer segments. So in that case, you may have to come up with different perceptual maps for different segments. Again, we'll see shortly how we can tell whether there are holes in the markets and what possible implications it has for the positioning of our brand. So, how differentiated a brand are perceived can also be inferred from the cross price elasticity. Okay, so if the cross price elasticity is high, then brands are perceived to be more substitutable. While on the other hand, if it is low, then they are perceived to be close substitutes. Okay, so a perceptual map may look something like this. So the benefit dimensions we alluded to earlier are economic value on the y-axis and aesthetic value on the x-axis. So this perceptual map gives us the perceived positions of different brands of air conditioning units. Since higher values on both dimensions are preferable as we move in the north easterly direction following the slanted solid vertical arrow, we find the brands that are the most preferred in the eyes of consumers. So in this case, the most preferred brand clearly is Trane. Okay, so that's the most preferred brand because this is where how we are get closer to the ideal value that the consumers ideal perception. So Trane is clearly one of the best perceived brands. Okay, and the most preferred brand. Now, if we take a specific brand, for example, York, the perceptual map tells us that in the eye of the consumer, the brands that are in close proximity of York are the ones that are viewed as close substitutes. Okay, so the closest competitors for York are Lennox, Rheem, and Carrier. Okay, because they are closest to this. So these are the closest substitutes. That means their positioning strategy is such where the consumers, the unique position that these brands have occupied in the minds of consumers is quite similar. It's quite close compared to a brand like Trane. So the perceptual maps also tells us where the gaps or the holes are. Now these would be the empty spaces in the plot where no brand currently exists. Okay, so occupying that space presents an opportunity provided it is financially feasible and there is sufficient demand. Now, given that more on the both dimensions is preferred by the consumers, as an extreme example from the consumer's perspective, the ideal point would be to offer infinite aesthetic value at zero or a very low price, but that will not necessarily generate profits for the brands. So as much as you would want to take the ideal spot, sometimes it's not economically feasible, and hence it makes no sense, economic sense. Okay. So in identifying the optimal location or the product to offer, now value to the consumer is one aspect, but profitability is also an equally important aspect, which must be traded off. Okay. So the final element of the product decisions that I want to talk about is packaging. Now, the packaging of the product is an attribute in itself and as a result can offer both functional and psychological benefits. So, for example, if you think about canned food, the fact that it is packaged in an airtight can increases the shelf life of the food and maintains its freshness, which are the functional benefits. Now, similarly, the fact that juices or medicines are packed in tamper-proof bottles assure that the contents are safe and offer a psychological benefit. Thus, packaging can allow us to differentiate ourselves from the competition, both in terms of objective and subjective benefits. Now, packaging can also have calorie or other information on the ingredients, which can be examined before the customer purchases the product. Okay, so they can be informative. The consumers have the right to know what they're consuming. So you see these nutritional labels and all the ingredients listed. So this is clear. This is making it transparent for the consumers to know what they're consuming. So it does add some additional value. Now, packaging like Tetra Paks can also affect how the products need to be stored, because Tetra Paks, for instance, do not need to be refrigerated, which actually lowers the cost to the retailers as well, because refrigeration is a huge cost borne by the supermarkets, and the products that do not require refrigeration certainly help them reduce their costs. Now, packaging can also affect how ease of consumption, like straws in juice packs or milk. So, packaging has to be kept in the consumption behavior also in mind. How do consumers consume our product? So, like in juice packs, you'll see these straws or milks. That also adds some benefits, some additional benefits. So, aside from the objective and the subjective benefits, packaging can also provide consumers with valuable information. Like I said, that can aid their purchasing decision and also their consumption process. So, it can also reduce the cost to the intermediary by minimizing the need for refrigeration, for instance, or increasing the shelf life. That's all I want to talk about packaging. And here I'll conclude our discussion on all the three main branding strategies, which is branding, positioning, and packaging. Thank you.